Hi, and thanks for joining me for the screencast. Today, we're going to look at roasting profiles. We'll cover their function, flexibility, and the ways they can really help improve your roast, as well as speed up your workflow in Roastmaster. We'll also look at some real-world examples of profiles to help you get an idea of how to implement them in your own workflow. So, first things first, what are profiles and how do I use them? A profile, in essence, provides the means to define a set of variables that collectively describe the details of a roast, and then easily apply those variables to any future roast, instantly providing a visual record of how that roast was performed. A profile can simply be a name, referring maybe to a pre-programmed machine setting on an automatic roaster, or it can be a detailed collection of control and reading curves that function as a roadmap designed to help you get accurate and repeatable results on a manual roaster. Much like recipe cards, Roastmaster gives you the ability to build an unlimited library of profiles. You can organize, rate, and annotate them, even share them. In essence, everything you need to build your own library of unique roasting recipes. Your own individual use of profiles, though, is probably going to depend on your particular roaster. Profiles and the curves that they can contain are designed to be flexible, simply because no two roasters and no two workflows are identical. Since their use in Roastmaster can vary greatly, let's start with the simplest features of profiles and work our way upward. At their root, profiles provide a means of recording how a particular roast was performed. By simply tagging a profile in a roast, you're creating a record of the settings or the variables you used in that roast, and then a pointer to easily view that data whenever you want. Whether this is actually comprised of curve data or maybe simply a textual name representing a setting on the roaster, you have the means of identifying that in the future. You can, of course, see this information whenever you browse through your past roasts, but in addition, and probably more importantly, this can be used in the roast console to quickly find past roasts that use this same profile, and then populate the roast graph and gauge with data from only these roasts. Now, if you're using a pre-programmed automatic roaster, you might not use any of the other features of profiles. You might define very simple profiles just using names that match those already programmed in the machine's memory, and your use of profiles is likely to stop here. If your roaster and workflow warrant it, though, your use of profiles can be extended with the inclusion of target curves. These target curves will provide essentially the roadmap to assist you during a roast. Whenever you tag a profile in any roast, the profile's target curves become a part of that roast and are visible in both the console graph and the analyzer. These will be your guide to the roaster settings or temperature values you intend to match during that roast. You can, of course, define new curves in each roast for the purpose of collecting data, but the instructional curves that comprise the profile will already be there for guidance as you roast. Let's talk about the two types of curves. If you roast with a roaster that provides the ability to manually control the settings of the machine directly as you roast, or even program them into its memory, you might choose to include control curves in your profiles. Control curves are a representation of machine controls that change during the roast, and in a profile become a roadmap for achieving a specific predefined roast style. Just tag the profile and its curves become a part of the roast, ready to guide you as you go. You can even enable curve alerts to remind you when a value changes so you're sure to never miss a milestone. Now, if your workflow consists of predefined profiles that you don't typically vary from, such as in a production shop, this becomes an even bigger time saver, because there's no need to actually enter new control data with each roast because that data is already in place from your profile. So, going further, if your roaster provides the means to measure temperature, specifically bean mass temperature, you'll likely add target reading curves to the mix. In this type of workflow, you'll use the target control curves as general instruction for controlling the roaster during the roast, but ultimately doing whatever's necessary control-wise to stay on track with your target temperature reading curves. This type of workflow is probably the most fruitful, whereas control curves are pretty much limited to a specific roaster and batch size. Bean mass temperature curves are actually very flexible and by nature portable and viable on small roasters and large roasters alike. For example, you may use the same bean mass temperature reading curve on both a small Quest sample roaster and a large ProBat production roaster. Whatever you use, collectively, your reading curves are a clear and reliable roadmap of the temperature milestones you're aiming for during the roast. So, we've seen how profiles help make your roast better, but they can also make your life a lot easier. When you tag a profile in a roast, the target curves contained in that profile become part of the roast and are instantly visible in the roast console graph and the roast analyzer. With just a tap, you've got all of your target curves loaded and the roadmap for your roast in place and everything you need to instruct you as you go. So you might think, well, that covers my target data, but what about recording new temperature data as I roast? Well, there are many benefits to keeping accurate track of actual live data during each roast. One, it provides a good way of seeing how the roast is behaving over time so that if you do drift from your target curves, you're better able to see what you need to do to correct it. And two, it provides a more accurate audit trail to make sure the temps you were aiming for are the temps you actually achieved. And this will actually come into play even more as you start scanning through your past roast and analyzing the cupping data. Small variances can have a big effect on taste, so it's nice to have exact data to poll. So recording new data is easy enough to do. You simply create new reading curves in the roast and record data to them. You're probably already familiar with this process in Roastmaster. What you might not know, though, is that profiles have a built-in feature to automate this process and make advanced workflows such as this truly a one-tap affair, and they're called curve templates. When curve templates are defined in a profile, Roastmaster will create identical copies of those templates directly in each roast that uses that profile for the purpose of recording new data. So you can have everything you need in each curve already defined: name, scale, type, notes, color. Data logging users can even specify which probe the new curve should automatically bind to. When the copies are made in the roast, they'll be identical to the templates, and the best part is all this happens in each roast with just a tap. So last but certainly not least, Roastmaster lets you create an unlimited library of profiles, essentially a recipe box for your own signature roasts. Profiles in Roastmaster are completely customizable. They can be named, organized, rated, annotated. You can even quickly share your profiles with other Roastmaster users. Just navigate to the Profile Details page and choose Export. Then you might choose to email this to a friend, and importing for them is as simple as choosing Open in Roastmaster. So not only can you build these libraries, but you can exchange them with other users and share your data. Profiles also, though, offer an advanced feature called Snapshots to both limit the need for constant data entry in each roast, as well as to help you experiment as you go and maybe hone your profiles over time and give you an audit trail to record what's working and what's not. So how do I use them? Well, you can leverage snapshots in a couple of ways. Snapshots are created automatically whenever you attempt to edit a profile's curve data during a roast. Why, you might think? Well, profiles are typically shared among many different roasts, and that's their point. They limit the amount of data entry you have to do, as well as help guide you in roasting. So any changes you make to the curve data of a profile would naturally apply to every other roast that uses that profile. But if you couldn't edit and tweak this data during a roast, profiles wouldn't be very flexible or even very useful in some situations. To solve this dilemma, Roastmaster automatically creates a snapshot when you attempt to edit a curve that belongs to a profile during a roast. So let's see this in action. Suppose we have a profile for our Quest roaster with our control curves already defined. We follow this profile maybe for a number of roasts and we're pretty happy with it, but think we can make it just a little bit better by adding a little time to the overall duration, particularly in the later stages of first crack. In this case, we proceed through the roast normally, but we'll increase our fan speed once we get to maybe about here to try to slow the heating of the drum down a little bit. All we physically need to do during our roast is make the adjustment on the roaster and add a set point to the profiles curve in Roastmaster. The curve value will change and we'll hear a camera click indicating that Roastmaster has changed our master profile into a snapshot and our curve data is now free to edit as we see fit in this particular roast. We can go down and look at the profile name and see that it's displayed with an asterisk now. If we visit the profile details, we can see the camera icon and that it's now labeled as a profile snapshot. We can also visit the master profile that it came from and also see that by creating this snapshot, Roastmaster has kept the data in all of our other roasts that already use this profile intact and segregated and safe. Also in the process, it's given us a good way to rate, name, and annotate this snapshot differently. Maybe we want to make notes or change the name and rating. In addition, next time we roast, we can tag this particular snapshot individually if we want to use it again as is, and we'll have a great way to see which variations of this profile are working for us and which aren't. Now, the use of snapshots doesn't end there though. You can create a snapshot manually by navigating to a profile's existing snapshots and tapping the plus symbol, or directly in a profile details view by tapping snapshot. If you do this from a roast, the master profile referenced in the roast will be replaced with the new snapshot, and you're free to edit it during the roast as you see fit. Now, most of what we've discussed here relates mainly to control curves. Reading curves are often more complex and probably not something you're going to want to sit and edit. Instead, you'd probably just choose to see where your live data goes by simply adjusting your control curves and recording the reading data as you go. However, if you're targeting a reading curve and simply want to try a longer or shorter roast duration, Roastmaster gives you a nice little feature to help with this as well. If you're using a profile that's unique to the current roast, either a brand new master profile or a snapshot you've just created, you can select a reading curve and condense or expand it by intervals of 15 seconds. If you target mainly reading curves, this is a great way to experiment without having to either guess or spend any time editing a complex reading curve. So now that we know a little bit more about profiles and how they work, you might be thinking, how do I get started? Well, there are several ways you can create profiles in Roastmaster. If you have existing handwritten roast logs, or maybe profiles outlined as values in a spreadsheet, you can create a profile manually. Just navigate to the roaster's profile list, tap the plus symbol to create a new profile, then give it a name, let's say Central Dark, then just begin defining your curves. Here, let's say we want a reading curve to show us the target temperature values at specific intervals during the roast. We'll give it a green color. From here, we can just input the values we need and their corresponding timestamps manually. When we're done, just save the curve. If we have any other curves, we can define those as well and set their values. Finally, if we want to record new temperatures in each roast as we go, we can define curve templates to automate this so that we don't have to manually define them each time we roast. To do this, just tap New Template, and let's use the same name as the matching target curve and the same color so that they logically correlate on the graphs. If we're using the data logging option, we could also set the probe bindings here so that whenever we tag this profile in a roast and these curves are created in that roast, the probe will automatically link before we're even ready to start. So save it and we're done. Okay, so that's the manual way. We can speed this up though if we already have one or more target curves residing in Roastmaster that we want to use to create a new profile from. We can first create a new profile like we did in the previous example, but this time instead of defining our curves manually, we'll just navigate to the roast that contains the curve we want, select it, then tap Copy Selected Curve, then navigate back to the profile and paste our copy. And let's go ahead and add a control curve as well. We'll go back to the roast, select, copy, back to the profile, and paste. Before we finish, we'll add maybe a curve template for the reading curve so that we can record those new values in future rows. Do that and we're done. Same result, but much faster. Okay, so that's pretty easy, but what if I really nail a roast? Let's say it's perfect and I want to turn that roast directly into a profile. No problem. In the roast, just choose Create Profile and give it a name. We'll go with Central Dark again. And then Roastmaster handles all the hard work for us. We can see we have all of our target curves in place, and Roastmaster was nice enough to create corresponding curve templates for each curve that's in that target curve list. To refine this a bit, suppose we don't want to actually record new control data in each roast, just maybe our temperature reading data. We'll just remove the control templates it created, and our profile is ready to use. That's it, we're done. So now that we've seen exactly what profiles are, what they can do to improve and speed our workflow, as well as how to create them, let's look at some real-world case uses. Profiles and the curves that they can contain are both designed to be extremely flexible in Roastmaster. Even if your roaster is an unconventional type, or maybe not even a roaster at all per se, there's probably a workflow in Roastmaster that will work for you. As we look at these examples, though, keep in mind they're just recommendations. Your individual workflow can be anything you want it to be in Roastmaster. You may not care about temperature reading curves and prefer to simply follow a known set of roaster controls, maybe quenching the roast when the samplers you're pulling from the trier smell right. On the other hand, though, you might not care about control curves. You know your roaster well enough to achieve the target temperatures you need without any further instruction. Whatever works for you is ultimately the right way. So let's have a look. Suppose you have a manual shop roaster, say a Probat or Diedrich, or even maybe a manual home roaster like a Quest or a Hot Top. On a roaster like this, you may have a number of controls you want to track, such as gas or amps, and maybe damper or fan controls. You probably also have one or more probes whose temperature readings you want to track, maybe bean mass temp and possibly an ambient drum temperature. A profile for your machine might look something like this. 2 control curves, heat and fan. Now these are going to function as your roaster control guides, and in this workflow you just simply echo these settings to the roaster as they change in Roastmaster during the roast. You'll also have 2 reading curves, bean temp and drum temp. In our examples here, the bean mass curve is arguably the most important. Your control curves are going to serve as a guide, but ultimately you will probably rely on your own expertise to dictate whether or not any fine-tuning adjustments are needed to your roaster control values in order to stay on track with your target bean mass curve. If you track both reading temps as your roast, especially with the data logging option, you're probably going to want to have 2 reading curve templates defined as well. One for each probe to provide the ability to record exact data each time you want and have these automatically set up for you when you tag this profile. Next, suppose you have a Genie Cafe home roaster, and since the temperature readouts on this particular machine are ambient readouts and not actually bean mass temperatures, you found for you it's more convenient to just worry about the heat control itself during the roast rather than trying to match any target temperatures. Your profile might just contain one single control curve called heat. During new roast, all that you have to do is emulate the settings of the heat curve to the roaster itself whenever the value in Roastmaster changes. So for this, you don't have any curve templates defined, but naturally you'll be free to add independent reading curves to individual roasts as you go whenever you want and track the temperature reading separately. You might even do this for, say, a range of roasts, maybe as an experimental phase, finding a better combination, then determining what needs to happen to the heat control in order to reproduce this same temperature ramp again, and then create a whole new profile from that. And let's say you roast on the Fresh Roast home roaster. On this smaller roaster, you don't have a means to measure temperatures at all, so you rely solely on your own learned combination of heat and fan settings. Your profile might look like this: 2 control curves, heat and fan. Since the heat setting is limited to 3 steps, you'd set that max level of the curve to 3. And the fan really isn't marked on the machine, so here we've used a nice round value of 10. Following this recipe will enable you to get the same results each and every time, and arguably more important, experiment and have a way to graphically see which of these combinations work and which ones don't in the future. Now, you don't have to actually be using a roaster per se at all. You might have a tricked out barbecue gas grill, maybe with a custom made drum on a rotisserie and a self-installed thermocouple. On this type of setup, you might have 3 control curves, one for each gas burner, and one reading curve for the internal ambient grill temperature. The temperature reading curve becomes rather important here due to the variances that might occur using 3 separate burner controls. So again, these will be your rough guides, but you'll keep a keen eye on the grill chamber temperature as you roast and make adjustments to the burner controls to keep your target temperatures in line. If you're not concerned with the minute details, you may choose to not actually record the adjustments you make as you roast, but if you do, snapshots will be a great help in easing the burden of constant data entry. In other words, you only need to record when you actually make changes to the existing profile, and snapshots will handle the details. Finally, your setup might be as simple as an unmodified whirly pop on a stove burner. In your setup, you track only the burner heat, relying on experience and roasting records to help you shape your future profiles. Your profile would just contain one curve, maybe called burner. You just follow the control values as they change during the roast and emulate the settings in Roastmaster to your burner control. If you maybe add a kitchen thermometer later to your whirly pop, just add a corresponding target reading curve to your profile and use that to help you match during the roast. Although the simpler the better for this particular setup, I know from experience your hands are typically pretty busy agitating the beans as you go. So we've seen a number of examples, but the most important thing to remember here is that your workflow can be whatever you want it to be. Profiles and the curves that they can contain are very flexible and can handle pretty much anything you throw at them. So that pretty much wraps it up for this screencast. It's been a long one, but hopefully you've sat through the whole thing and learned some of the features and benefits of profiles. When deciding how to implement profiles into your own workflow, remember that they can function according to your own individual needs. The examples we've covered here are just that. They're guides and examples. Also keep in mind the point of profiles is twofold: workflow accuracy and workflow speed. In other words, if your workflow is simple, you may get all the benefits you need from profiles by simply tagging one in a roast, and if you utilize curves, by following the roadmap they give you. If that's enough for you, then you don't have to actually record anything while you roast. Others, though, with more complex workflows or needs, especially data logging users, will probably find that data collection in each roast is a must. It offers a lot of benefits in terms of accuracy and the ability to go back and audit roasts and their cupping data later. Whatever you need, though, Roastmaster is happy to oblige, and however you implement them, I think you'll find profiles and curves extremely flexible and should be able to easily settle on a style that exactly fits your needs. So thanks for watching this screencast, and please keep an eye on our website where we'll be continually expanding the screencast library to help you get the most out of using Roastmaster.